I'm a member of Neighborhoods Without Borders. Neighborhoods Without Borders is just a group of folks that has come together and is working to combat racism in the Flint area. The Tendaji Talks are our longest running program. We've been doing these for a number of years now. And if you don't know, the Tendaji Talks are named after Tendaji Ganges, a longtime Flint activist who was a founding member of Neighborhoods Without Borders and who passed away far too soon. We have done, as far as Neighborhoods Without Borders, we've done a few other initiatives to try to break down barriers, and everything is pretty much on hold right now because of the pandemic. So we are looking at some additional initiatives that we can do digitally to be more activist, more proactive. If you're interested in being part of our core planning group, anti-racism advocacy in Flint, please just put your email in the chat and be happy to add you to our mailing list for our core group. I'm going to introduce Erin Powell, who's got her funny gaucho picture up right now. There she is. Once the panel starts, we're going to ask everybody who's not on the panel to put yourselves on mute and put all your questions in the chat, questions and comments, and Erin will be curating the questions as they come in. Our time frame is from 6 to 7:30. Okay, anything else I need to say other than introductions?
And the wind's not terribly strong. Anytime you get the sunshine.
Iris here, I think you need to mute yourself.
No.
Okay, if you're not on the panel, if you would please mute yourself, we're getting some background noise.
And whoever is the host, you can mute them also.
Do you know how to do?
Main switcher.
Okay. Okay. Our panel this evening.
All the expertise we can get, because this is the first. Amen. And
okay.
We want to work together. Amen. If you make a mistake, that's all right. Switch the button.
I'll introduce the panel. We've got Dr. Herbert Miller, who is pastor of Metropolitan Baptist Tabernacle, and he seems to be much more technically savvy than we are. Dr. Miller, have you? We have Mr. Eric Mays. Eric Mays is Flint City Council representing the First Ward. Ben Pauli is an assistant professor at Kettering University, and Arthur Woodson, a community activist. And our topic is the Flint Water Crisis Settlement. It's been controversial, so we've got a number of different viewpoints represented here. And the panel is going to be moderated by Reverend Freelon Threlkeld, who is also a member of Neighborhoods Without Borders. And I'm going to just turn it over to him. And as I said, if you're not on the panel, please mute yourself.
Amen. Thank you, Judy. Thank you, and welcome all of our panelists and all of you that are out there tuning in to this Tendaji Talk Hour dealing with the Flint crisis and its settlement and how it affects the Black community. This is February has been set aside for Black history, but it's 13 months in my calendar and 399 days. I'm Black when I wake up, Black when I go to sleep. So I live Black, talk Black, and support Black. And but today, being part of this Tendaji Talks, we're trying to our goal is to solve the problem of racism and come together. Someone said this morning that if we work together, we can solve our problem. We must come together, galvanize, come together and work our problems. We have differences, but we can work together. Amen. We are more alike than we are different. All right, but to the panel, we want you to respect our time and respect each other. We don't want to get in a debate or a deep argument. And so I'm going to be the facilitator. And if I have to mute you or unmute you, whatever it takes to slow you down, pull your coattail, I'll do that. Amen. And you have that understanding. So if I speak to you like that, you understand what I'm saying. Now, Judy, or whoever that's going to read the question, Judy, read the first question now. Before we go, are there any questions?
Unmute myself, sorry. Okay, the first question, and I believe it's for any of the panelists, although maybe Reverend Thelkel wants to direct it to somebody, but our first question is racism, systemic racism, manifested in the water crisis settlement? And if so, how?
All right. We're going
Can you repeat the question? Can you repeat the question one more time?
Yes, sir. Is racism, systemic racism, manifested in the Flint Water Crisis Settlement? And if so, how?
All right. I'm going to each one of us talk on that. And I'm going to start it off with Dr. Miller. Dr. Miller, I want you to chime in on that question. Do you understand the question, sir?
I believe so. I think it's a rhetorical question because I think everyone on this call would probably agree that systemic racism is real. It's present in all of our institutions and organizations, and decisions are made a lot of times based upon the color of people's skin. I mean, I think a lot of us agree Dan Kildee took a hit for this last week when he said if the rioters at the Capitol were Black and brown people, it would have ended much differently. It would have been tragic. Well, for some reason, some people in the state of Michigan took issue with him saying that, but it was the truth. I actually sent him a text message and thanked him for saying that. And I told him, keep speaking the truth, because we cannot fix what's wrong with our society if we don't want to acknowledge what the truth really is. And it's sad to say that systemic racism exists in all of our, especially our political institutions. Whenever political decisions are made, it's apparent that non-Black and brown people tend to fare much better than Black and brown people when decisions are made, when there is interaction with the judicial system, when there's interaction with law enforcement, even buying houses and getting jobs. You can say it does not exist, but when you look at the stats, it's apparent that it's a part of everything we do. And it was a part of this settlement, because if it was in Ann Arbor, if it was in Grand Rapids, one, I believe the settlement would have happened much quicker. And two, I think the settlement would have been much more.
All right. Thank you, Brother Miller. Brother Pauli. Brother Pauli, you chime in on that question.
All right, thanks very much for the question and for the invitation to be on the panel. So to address this issue, I'm going to suggest that we go back to the water crisis itself and talk about its impact and its origins. I mean, we know that it had the dramatic impact it did here, in part because the community was already suffering from systemic disadvantage. And for all of the reasons why that Dr. Miller just mentioned, we know that disadvantage has a racialized character, whether you're looking at criminal justice, whether you're looking at access to food and healthcare. We can identify racial disparities in about every area of life. And we know that disadvantage has been shaped by centuries worth of racially discriminatory institutions, ideologies, and behaviors. So I think keeping that historical view in mind is also part of thinking systemically about all of this. You can't talk about the significance of people losing resale value on their homes because of the crisis without talking about the massive gap that already exists between Black wealth and white wealth, which has its roots in slavery and has been maintained subsequently by institutions that continuously direct money and privilege towards those who already possess it. So, I don't think we can avoid talking about systemic racism when we talk about the impact of the water crisis. Neither can we avoid it in speaking of the origins of the crisis. I mean, a lot of the underlying vulnerabilities of infrastructure and institutions, whether we're talking about aging pipes or our understaffed water treatment plant, those can be traced back to social dynamics like white flight that eroded the city's tax base and were obviously driven largely or primarily by race. We also can't forget the role of emergency management in all of this. We know that emergency management was the tool that allowed an overwhelmingly white administration to intervene in majority Black cities it claimed weren't being run properly. And part of the whole premise there was that the state and its appointees had a better understanding of the problems faced by cities like Flint and more will and ability to solve them than residents themselves and their elected officials. So, the model was, we'll come in and define your problems for you. We'll tell you how bad you're suffering and why. And then we'll fix the problems we define using our own methods, whether you like it or not, and whether you agree that what we're calling a fix is actually a fix. So, that kind of paternalistic logic, we know better, we'll take it from here, trust us, you'll be better off in the end. That's an attitude I think we're all too familiar with. And, it didn't stop just with the actions that led up to the crisis. You can also trace it into the response to the crisis, even after it was, officially acknowledged. So, when we see people reacting with disappointment or hostility to the water settlement, I think it's because there are aspects of all of this that seem like the same old story, where we've got other people kind of defining what the problem is, what the harm is, deciding what the appropriate response to that harm is. And then, our role in all of this is just to kind of vote their proposed solution up or down at the end of the day. You opt in or you opt out, but you don't have a seat directly at the table when it's being negotiated. And to some extent, your interests and your voice are marginalized throughout that process.
Well, thank you, sir, on that point. All right, Brother Woodson, you heard the question?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. It's upsetting when we speak about race, because a lot of people get upset because we're trying to tell everyone, hey, listen, we didn't have systemic racism for years and years. And when we try to discuss it and tell people what the issues are, you always get a lot of pushback behind it. And I can give you a couple of examples of how, if we were in a different area of the state, they would fix it quicker.
Right.
Over in Grand Rapids, they had, Wolverine with PFAS. It took no time for Governor Snyder to give them $23 million to do a cancer cluster study and biomonitoring.
All right.
They just had PFAS. And we allowed them to set the narrative with just lead. We had PFAS, TTHM, we had all kinds of stuff in our water. Why didn't they do that here? And now it goes over into the lawsuit to where they just talking about lead when we had all different types of illnesses where ATSDR, CDC, MDHHS, all of them should have came in here. You have classism and racism here in the city of Flint. Some suffer with two of the isms, some suffer with the one. And when we speak on it, if people would come together and say, hey, you know what? This is going on in the Black community. They are being abused in the Black community, instead of saying, it wasn't just Black. It happened to us too. We know that it happened to you too, but see, you're suffering along with us because you're poor, but you still have that privilege. You still have that privilege where we don't, and it's because of the skin color. And until we solve that issue of systemic racism, where instead of just putting someone as a director, you got to go into the belly of the beast, which is the system itself, and change the system. And until they do that, we're going to be in the same predicament we are in throughout. I mean, you look at Frazier, when Frazier had that giant sinkhole.
All right, Dr. Woodson, we'll hold that. We got your point, but we just want to stick with that question now. And there's more to talk because we want to stay.
No, well, I was talking about racism, so
All right, we're gonna move on. Thank you, but I appreciate that, Joe. Appreciate that. We got Mays. All right, Mays. Chime in.
Yeah.
Did you hear that question real good now?
Yeah, I heard the question. And when I talk about the answer to the question, I would qualify it by saying when I look at racism, I look at it as individuals can be racist, persons can be people can be racist one to another. But when I hear the term systematic racism, that term, then I look at the bigger picture of institutions and housing and government and how America as a whole has been racist in the system. And so when you look at our geographical living areas, such as Flint, Detroit, Benton Harbor, in the state of Michigan at the time, the emergency manager law was in place, and that was systematic. Now, when you get into the settlement and you say have systematic racism carried over to the settlement, the answer for me is yes, because you're still dealing with the geographic location that's predominantly Black, that has been discriminated against. Race has been a factor in housing and banking and economic development. And so therefore, as they propose this settlement, it's still there. They have not treated these Black community like I've seen other ethnic groups when it comes to even a settlement.
Yes. Thank you, Mays. Thank you. And thank each and every one of you on that. And you are right. It is present. Racism is present in that settlement because Flint is one of the most racist cities in the nation. And this just didn't start 6 years ago. It started like 400 years ago. And when you really look at everything that's involved with us as Black people geographically, even when these lawyers met earlier in the game, they used the word that population. That population, that was a code word to me, was saying those Blacks in the Flint area. So we have got to now come up with some solutions. So brethren and sisters, what solutions can we have detected racism there. What can we do now to move forward, Brother Miller? As you were saying this morning, the problem is there. So where do we go from here? How can we fix this and move forward, Dr. Miller?
What would make it easier is that if we had a larger majority of people who would admit that it exists, because it's very difficult to fix a problem and move forward if a large portion of the population does not want to admit that it exists. America is built on race and class.
Yes.
I'm gonna say that again. America is built on race and class. A large majority of the wealth that has been accumulated by certain families in this country comes from the fact, not all, but the large majority, it comes from the fact that most of them owned slaves and plantations back when slavery was booming and this country was making billions of dollars off of it. The other piece, classism, people who don't make a certain amount of money are many times treated like minorities, right? So you have two sets of minorities. You have ethnic minorities, but then, and this other piece is a double entendre, because the people who are at the poverty line or lower middle class are really not the minority. They're physically and numerically the majority, but when it comes to money, they're the minority. And everything in this country is set up based on that. We don't want to admit it. That's why we can't have honest conversations. That's why we can't get to the root of the problem. That's why we cannot fix it. If you don't believe classism is strong in this country, start looking at how credit reports are generated. Credit is not made for poor people. Credit is made for rich people. Credit cards are made for people who don't need it. If you don't believe me,
Mhm.
go and max up your credit cards and then see what happens to your credit score and pay your monthly bills on time. It's made for people who can just pay it off. So in order for us to get to the solution, we first have to admit the problem.
That's it. All right, good point. Good point. Recognize the problem and then do something about it. All right, then, Dr. Paul, or Dr. Pauli, solution.
So just to make sure I understand the question properly, we're talking about solutions to the problem of systemic racism, generally speaking.
In the settlement, yes.
In the settlement. Yeah, I mean, so I think it's first of all, we've got to get away from talking about racism as if it's just a psychological phenomenon, as if it's just something that, you know, a way that people think when they look at the world. When we look at racial disparity, it isn't just shaped by what people think, and it isn't just shaped by consciously racist acts. You know, it is shaped to some extent by the normal, quote unquote, operation of institutions that exist within an already racially unequal society. And so, you know, when we talk about this, the settlement proposal as reflecting systemic racism, in saying that, we're not necessarily accusing any particular person of trying to be racist towards Flint residents. Now, we're also not ruling that out, right? But we have to be careful, I think, to take a broader view of the phenomenon of systemic racism, to get beyond individual psychology and even individual acts, and start looking at the way in which the structure of society shapes outcomes, regardless of what people may or may not want to be the case. So, you know, again, that's why when we look at the implications of the settlement, we've got to look at the underlying disadvantage that to some extent it is failing to address, right? And that is racialized disadvantage that has been built up over decades and decades and decades. So, you know, to some extent, it's part of the problem if it gives people the impression that it is addressing those underlying issues, right? It does not get us to that point. And if we believe that it does, then it means that we don't have an understanding of the fundamental issues that, you know, we're dealing with when we talk about systemic racism. Now, you know, whether the details of the settlement could be somehow changed in order to align it more with our expectations of racial justice, I think that's a more complicated question, and we'll have to get into the weeds, I think, to address that. But generally speaking, again, we have to understand this as one of the products of a system that is racially unequal and unjust to begin with. And so, you know, we can't look at it in isolation. And I think just the systemic thinking that we're engaging in right now is at least part of the solution as to how we address these sorts of things. You've got to look at the overlap and connections between different institutions that help to perpetuate racial disparity. And you have to look at the history behind all of it So you can't look at the settlement outside of that framework.
We're looking at it. We're looking at it. All right, Brother Woodson.
I'll
Solution.
make it real quick. We have the system is set up to where they put what I call gatekeepers
Right.
in place, to where they use a black face to pacify the black community. And
All right.
the blacks in the community do not want to speak out against the other blacks. And until we remove those gatekeepers, we're going to be continuously done the way that we are being done in this lawsuit and everything else. So until we can remove that and cut the chase and quit taking crumbs, when we could, instead of, you know, getting the $200 million, we getting $20, you know, to sell out our community. And until we, you know, stand up against that and start speaking out on that, it's going to remain the same.
So we've got to get to the table when these decisions are made in the beginning.
Correct.
And that's where we are missing the boat.
We can't get to it because they have the gatekeepers at the gate to make sure that we don't get through the gate to get to the table.
We got to deal with the gatekeeper. All right, Maze. Solution. You got the unmute. I hear you.
Solutions, yeah, solutions for me in the proposed partial water crisis settlement is this. First, we should force the attorneys and the powers that be to give us a look at what they think or propose when the EPA and others settle, who can put 100, 800, 900 million, $1 billion additional dollars in. The solution is that we must recognize that the lawyers, the state of Michigan, certain people, the city of Flint, have agreed on 600 million. Now we're at the table, but it's over 60,000 of us. And in order to communicate and educate people effectively in a timely manner, and the terms are opt-in and opt-out, the masses now is their turn, and we've got to help them to recognize that the court, the judge, and everybody is watching your decision, your vote. Is it good enough? Will you opt in? Will you opt out? And so if we can teach them how to do arithmetic, adding and subtracting, meaning that the lawyers will take over 200 million off the top under this formula. Children will get X amount, adults will get X amount, depending on the various categories. The solution, if you can educate them to that, show them the amount of the check that they will get individually, then they will be intelligent enough to accept or reject this settlement that I believe is shortchanging folks. So we're in COVID-19. We're on a Zoom meeting now. We got to communicate to over 50,000 people. And the solution is to use every mechanical device we have and every other device to communicate in a timely manner so we can reject this inadequate and unfair settlement and send people back to the table.
All right, all right, all right. So going back to our question, does racism exist in this settlement even from the beginning? We all can say, can we agree that the motive, the design, the purpose was actually designed to leave out, or should I say, discredit the Black community in Flint? And that's because of the lack of our leadership that we have in Flint today. And that's why the gatekeepers, those powers to be, are controlling what goes to the ordinary people. And we are being left out.
Pastor, how many times in the Black or white community have you seen lawyers and powers that be present a settlement to individuals and don't tell them what their check will be before they ask them to accept it or reject it? Where they do that at?
That's a good question, but it's something I could give you an answer, but I want us to be together on the answer. Because the original question was, is there any racism in that settlement directed toward Black people by design? How did it affect the Black? How does it affect the Black people? And we're getting the short end of the stick. And we've always been a day late and $1 short because of the gatekeepers. And the gatekeepers are predominantly white. The gatekeepers are in power. And like one speaker said, we do have some Black faces, but these faces are known as Jews. They sell out and we get messed up. Hold on now.
Pastor
Yes,
Turco, you know, a lot of times they look at us. I mean, poverty is a $1 billion industry, and they know that in the poor community, you know, we're hungry, we're thirsty. So they throw out $600 million, and that sounds good. That makes it sound real good. You know, people in the community, something, and I talk to a lot of people and they say, well, something beats nothing. And
Yes.
we go with it. And instead of fighting and standing up and saying, hey, you know what? I'm tired of being treated like third class. We allow people to put word salads together, you know, put words together because they can put some real good words together and make it sound good. And
Right.
they have us fight each other over crumbs. And until we wake up and take ownership and stand up and say enough is enough, they're gonna keep on doing it to us.
Well, you're right, my brother. You're right. And Sister Judy, I know our time is of essence, and we want to did we do justice to that question?
Yes, I think we did. I think we did.
We're doing justice.
We're still good. We're good on time. We're good on
All
time.
right. Well,
The
you know,
next
that's what
question, we were really going to get into the weeds with the next one. We
Well,
wanted to know.
just before you go there, Judy, let's make sure we are clear on that first question. I see the smile on Pauli's face, and I see the smile on Eric's face, and I know we'll be in pretty good shape. Okay. Are we clear, panel, on that question?
I think together as a whole, we addressed it. But I can't.
All right, Dr. Miller.
Yeah, I was just going to add, we have got to change the systems. That's where it starts. We can't change people's hearts. We can't change people's prejudices. We can't change the way people think a lot of times, but we can change the systems. The systems that we have in this country were put in place, generally speaking, by rich white male landowners. So when you have rich people and people in power who actually construct the systems, they will construct the systems to do what they want done, which is keep them wealthy and keep them in power. So we've got to get involved and figure out how to change these systems, because the systems are the parameters that we operate within. If you change the system, you use the system to accomplish a more egalitarian society.
Amen. I guess that's why they're having this impeachment situation going on in Washington, because of the system. And they're going to have to come up with solutions also. Long as everybody's clear on that.
Well, Pastor, the system around the settlement is designed for us to accept it in mass numbers without knowing the details. And so that's the systematic racism that's inside the settlement. They create systems to not give us adequate information, but make rush decisions, and they're doing it to a community. And when you put it in context of the settlement, the same systematic racism is playing a role in the tendering of this settlement.
That's all right. Because I believe when that first came out to vote on this, accept that settlement from the state, our mayor and the 6th council person chimed in on that settlement and accepted it, where we should have rejected it at that point, the mayor and those council persons. So yes, by design, there's a bad system. It needs to be fixed. And the only way it's going to fix it is that white people recognize that there is a problem. And when we have this problem, until we come together and work it out, as Dr. Miller is saying, we've got to recognize the problem, black, white, or blue or green, and then fix the problem, because it can be done. All right, then. We'll move to our second question, Judy.
Okay, absolutely, Reverend Carroll. We wanted to get into some of the specific problems. I know the panel are all people who are quite knowledgeable about the settlement, and some of us are not. And so we wanted you to share with us what are some of the specific problems with the settlement as you see it, or things that are creating barriers for the plaintiffs? And how do these barriers, if they do exist, how do they end up in the agreement? And would there have been a more just way to do it? So that's kind of a long one.
All right. We're looking at the settlement as it is today. What problems are there in that settlement that affect the Black community? Can we point them out at this particular time? What do we see in that settlement that's a problem that affect the Black community?
First of all, the dollar number.
It's not on the panel, Doc. I'm sorry. It's not open to the public. Am I right now? We'll open later, but this is directed to the panel.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
Robert's not on that panel. This is just the panelists.
I would say that cancer is a serious issue in the Black community. And the water had TTHM and PFAS, cyanide, arsenic, and all other kind of things, PCB, and all kinds of Legionella. I mean, you name it, it was in there. And there's a serious uptick of cancers since the water crisis of April 2014. And in that settlement, they do not address cancer. So if I go to a claim administrator and I say, hey, I have cancer, and I don't have documentation to prove that the water caused it, by me opting in and they denied me, if CDC and all the other research comes about and say cancer was caused by this water, I forfeited my right to be able to come back and sue the state, the city, and the federal government. So why would they even try to get me to sign in when they haven't even found out what all the causes are? And then on top of that, I heard the judge say that we didn't need documentation to get any money the other day on the line. Well, if I don't have a blood bone testing done, I don't get any money. If I don't have any physical injury that's proven that the water did it, I don't get any money. If I didn't have skin rash, I don't get any money. If I didn't have miscarriages, I don't get any money. Legionnaires, I don't get any money. So now that brings us to property damage. If I didn't own a house, lease a house, or have water bills, I still don't get any money. So why are you saying that I don't need documents and I can get money and I can't? And it's only up to $1,000, and I could have spent $3,000 on my home filtration system. So I'm still not being made whole.
So that is a point that it is unfair. All right, Brother Pauli, what's in that settlement that's not fair, or that will affect, that has affect and will affect the Black community?
Well, I mean, for starters, I think it's important to acknowledge that the settlement proposal does not represent some kind of ideal form of justice. It's a product of compromise. It's a compromise between interests that are to some extent competing. I mean, we have the interests of residents, we have the interests of the state, among these other parties. Those interests are not totally aligned. And, whether we like it or not, whatever justice we're able to achieve in this life anyway, isn't done in a vacuum, right? It's done within the context of competing interests. And so, the state and the other parties to the settlement have an interest in, limiting their liability. And so we, see that to some extent, reflected in the size of the settlement, as well as in some of the specific provisions. Some of the issues that Art has raised about the need for documentation, I think are very real. I mean, very serious. Just speaking personally, back when the news was breaking about lead in water, I was one of the parents that, ultimately got his child, tested for blood lead, but I didn't do it in time. He'd already stopped drinking the water for over a month. And so his blood test came back as normal. And so that's the number that they now have in the state database that is going to help to determine what, category he falls in. I also had, a member of my household die of medical complications, including antibiotic-resistant pneumonia. And I asked for Legionella testing at the time, and they didn't do the testing, and then it was too late. And so, you know, is there any connection there whatsoever to the water? Never know, but certainly don't have any documentation of it. And there are plenty of other, you know, residents who I think are in a similar position where they might, you know, suspect that the water was responsible for some kind of harm, but they weren't able to get a doctor to take them seriously when it mattered. And so they're kind of, you know, stuck now in that predicament, and they're going to fall into, they might get some, you know, compensation out of this, but it's not going to approach what they think that they deserve. So, you know, I think it's important to say, you know, it's maintaining a moral ideal of justice and continuing to push for that and advocate it. I mean, that's part of the work of justice. That's really important, to expand people's moral imaginations and to think about, you know, what all is possible from that perspective. You know, on the other hand, back to the reality that this is a compromise and that there are competing interests at play here. You know, just to play devil's advocate a little bit, I'm not sure that the best solution for the average resident is to, you know, try to seek some more ideal settlement in some other way. You know, if you think that the deck is stacked against residents in this settlement, you know, the deck is going to be stacked however you go at these institutions. And I'm not sure that there's another road here that's going to be easier. So I'd love to hear people's thoughts about that. You know, I think that it's important to say that we can be critical of the settlement and we can keep raising up a more radical ideal of justice and pushing for that however we can. But that doesn't necessarily mean that, you know, people should automatically decide to opt out of this thing. It's something that has to be carefully considered based on their individual circumstances.
All right, thank you. Brother Mays? I know you spoke earlier about.
Yeah, can you give me a second, go to Pastor Miller, then I'll come back.
All right, Dr. Miller.
First of all, the deck is always stacked against minorities and poor people. You don't stop fighting because the deck is stacked against you. You fight and you get what you can, and hopefully you get more after the fight than you would have if the fight had not occurred. To try to put it simply, this lawsuit eliminates the possibility of not enough people receiving compensation. So the way that a lot of the details is written inside of the settlement, it pretty much eliminates, in my opinion, it's going to eliminate more people than it includes. That's a problem, because what you're saying to me is that when I go down to Sam's and buy 18 cases of water for the last 5 years, I go down and stock up on water, all the filters I bought, the whole house filter that my church put on the parsonage, people sitting in line for 2 and 3 hours, people having to go to water boxes, going to the water pods when they were open, not even including the psychological trauma from having illnesses and trying to determine, does this come from the lead? Does this come from some other chemicals? Or is it just something that happened to me outside of that? You know, this community was already traumatized when all of this happened. And now we're double and triple traumatized. We got to still deal with a water settlement while we're in the midst of a pandemic and people are dying. And we can't even link that together because we don't know what's the pandemic, what's because people's immune systems have been compromised because they've been drinking chemicals out of the water. It's just a hodgepodge of foolishness. But at a minimum, here's what I believe. Nobody has to agree with me. If you lived in the city of Flint during this water crisis, you ought to receive some type of compensation. If you can prove that you have some type of physical ailment related to the water crisis, you ought to receive more. But the fact that I've been humping water for 5 years since I moved here. My dog died of cancer. I'm trying to figure out because he was getting in the water outside, and I tried to keep him from getting in there. He got in it. He got cancer and died. You know, we got to hump all these filters, all these food giveaways at the churches. The church has spent money out of our pockets, thousands of dollars, making sure people have filters and all this stuff. Everybody who's been in Flint ought to receive some type of compensation, and those, the sicker you are, the more you ought to receive. That's just how I feel about it. And I think it's a travesty that is not happening.
All right, Mays, are you ready? 2 seconds on that comment.
Yeah, I appreciate it. If I'm understanding the question in general, the question is saying, what is wrong with the settlement? The settlement basically, just follow me on this. The settlement is basically a division of money among residents after attorney fees and costs. Now, it's divided, 80% of it go to children who were 17 and under. The other 20% basically is really 79 point some percent to children. The other 20% is adults. So you got 80% for children and 20% for adults. That's the 100%.
Let him know he's on mute.
Look at that. At this, and when my phone rang, let's look at that. The 80% for children, if the children were 6 and under, the most affected by lead, and it's only concentrating on lead, and it should concentrate on more injuries than just primarily lead. But when you look at 6 and under, 64% of that 80% goes to children 6 and under. And if you do the arithmetic, if all things was even and the amount of children is estimated right and they all sign up, that might equate to $20,000 per child. But some would advocate that Medicare and Medicaid, in addition to a chunk of money, might do them well. Some would educate for that 6 and under, the most affected group, some educational type of settlement in their life might do them well.
All right.
When you go to the next group of children, the numbers drop dramatically from 64% to a 10% recovery, and then 13 to 17, a 5% recovery. That 5% recovery for that age group of children is not hardly different from the 3% for the adult category who have no injuries, that's capped off at $1,000. Why would you cap off adults at $1,000 who experience the type of thing that Pastor Miller just explained? And
Right.
then it's got a category of adults who can prove personal injury, some bodily injury. Now look at the difference between the children's category and the adults. The children, if they don't have any personal injury documentation, they still can get a cut of money. Adults who have no personal injury documentation in that category can't get money. So it's problems with the structure. It's also problems with the amount of documentation that you're going to have to get in a short period of time. So the settlement is problematic in its division. And Herbert was right. It's problematic in the amount of money that's been influxed into it after attorney fees and costs. And it's problematic on the opportunity to gather documentation and evidence in a timely manner to be processed.
So getting back to the question, brothers, there is a problem. This was by design, and we believe that the motive was racist in the beginning. And the stipulations, the monies to be received were thrown out there. Certain people bought into accepting. The first time the settlement was put out, the state said, okay, we're gonna settle for 600 and help you out. I think it's 640 million. And some people bought into that. 6 council persons bought into it, the mayor bought into it, and finally
The
it was
governor.
settled. And I don't believe, like Dr. Miller said this morning, there was not enough residential people of Flint input in the original design and setup of the settlement. So yes, there are some problems within that settlement
Pastor through
that affect the Black people.
Pastor
Who was that?
That was me.
Yes, sir.
Can I say this? And Councilman May's been touching on it, and they won't give him an answer on it. They want us to opt in, and we go to these claim administrators, and they say that we don't get anything, and we won't be able to get anything, and we won't be able to sue down the road. Angela Wheeler said at City Council that they trying to get everybody they can when they was voting on that $20 million settlement at council. They trying to get everybody that they can into this lawsuit, this settlement now. So down the road, it won't be that many people. So Councilman Mays, when you speak to them again, ask them that if I opt in and I find out that the claim administrators say that I can't get anything, am I locked in to where I can't sue down the road, for anything else? If they come up with something else. What it looks like they're doing is trying to herd everybody into the slaughterhouse. And if you qualify or if you don't, and one of the lawyers, Mark Cooker, even said it, that if you get in this, you don't get anything, you're just out of luck. You're out of luck. So that's what it looks like to me that they're doing. Only 30%, he said, going to qualify, because Bishop Jefferson even said it the other day that they had over 2,800 people for bone or evaluation, and they only tested by the end of last year 28 people. So now you in a time frame to where they got to do these evaluations. How are we going to beat that time frame or that deadline for everybody to get evaluation done, all the kids to get evaluation? So it seemed like only 30% of the people or the kids going to even be able to get an evaluation.
And it gets more difficult than that, because all the stuff that Mr. Woodson said is correct, but then they want you to go to this, what is it, the NES center that's attached to Mona teacher. Okay, when you start looking into that, you got to take 2 days off from work, right? Flint has more people in poverty than most other cities. So now you want me to take off work. I got to go get all of this testing done. You want me to get bone lead testing. All of the lawyers only have one machine, which one company has, which means the other lawyers can't even get their clients tested. If I got a child, I got to take my child to a pediatric specialist. No telling how many times I got to go there. Then I've got to go to a neuropsychologist that most people can't even pronounce that.
Say it again.
See all of the hurdles that seems to have been put in place to prevent people from being able to qualify. And on top of that, you told us the water was good for a year or two, so we were drinking it and having sicknesses and stuff that we thought was just a normal part of life. And come to find out, it could have been linked to lead or these other chemicals. And I have no way of going back and proving it now.
That's good, brother. That's good, Pastor Miller, because Brother Pauli said earlier that a lot of times, and I'm quoting what he said, but I believe in general, the gatekeepers are defining Black people in the community of Flint. And that's been for years.
Pastor Threlkeld, may I say this? It's designed that when these notices come in the mail in the next few days, some people are accessing stuff online, but it'll be thousands and thousands of notices come out. And look at how they've designed this. They say register. The news is saying register. It's time to register. You got until March the 29th. They're not calling it an opt-in form. They've got it disguised as a registration form, but once you register, you done opt in and you locked in. And after that March 29th date, the registration, as they call it, period, then after that March 29th date, they go into the claim. You file a claim. The claim is the process that'll go between March and August, where they evaluate your claim, look at your evidence, and decide what your check will be. I'll repeat, how many times do individuals get approached to accept or reject a settlement and don't know what their check will be? So this is by design to bait you in, to opt in unknowingly what your damages or check will be. And then when you get to the end of that road, you can't opt out. So I've asked these attorneys, Pauli, Mr. Pauli, since this is by design and since it's an agreement among different parties, why can't they agree to process them claims, and then and only then do residents make an intelligent decision to opt in or out? And we can get more into the in or out and what your rights are when you opt in or out based upon if you're satisfied later. But those are the problems with this proposed settlement.
The average, based upon these problems within this settlement, by design, the average resident, including myself, I don't understand all of these individual hurdles, as Dr. Miller explained to us, that we have to go through to even qualify for some money. And going back to our question, Judy, could you read that second question one more time to help me to get back in to help us to come to a solution here on that problem?
Okay, what are some of the specific problems? Panel's done a good job with that one. How did those barriers end up in the agreement? We may not know, but would there be a more just alternative? If you look at any of the specific problems that you all mentioned, is there a different way to do it?
Hey, Pastor Thrillkill, we know how we know how it got there. We know how it got there. Governor Whitmer. Governor Whitmer and the city, the state agreed with the settlement and said, this is our settlement. And, you know, we doing $600 million because the Republicans will only accept this. And that's the solution to that, is that our elected officials have to quit trying to bargain with our lives. You know, they don't, it's a political position for them. She said, you know, the Republicans only accept $600 million. Well, what she should have said was, I'm going to take 1.5 billion to this Republican legislation or legislators who imposed a PA 436 and allowed Snyder to poison us. And if they reject this settlement for 1.5 billion, they have to go to trial. And if, you know, the jury in the trial say that the state has to pay that, then it's not on her. It's on the Republican legislators. But we have elected officials who does not have the will to stand up for the people, but they rather stand up for their political positions. So that is the solution. We need people, leaders who will stand up for the people instead of standing up for themselves.
Well, then as a solution and recognizing that problem, Woodson, as a resident in Flint, a registered voter, active in electing politics in various positions, politician, what can we do to move on? As Dr. Miller said, what can we come to, how can we come together and move forward and make sure that the residents of Flint get their equal share. We just can't roll over and die. We just can't sit on the sideline and say, Lord, we'll work it out. We have got to galvanize and come together, mobilize, and like you say, build a fire under our local politicians, from the mayor on up the line, state reps, senators, Peterson, Stabenow, Big Dan, the Muscle Man, Kildee, all the way up to the vice president or to the president in Washington. To recognize this problem, and we got to make some noise. We've got to do something.
Pastor, let me say this, since Mr. Pauli and Mr. Miller is being so polite, and I know they are both sharp as tacks. Let me say this. It got there. We got in this situation because lawyers who said they wanted their money off the top agreed with city, state, McLaren Hospital, and others to cut their liability. That's how we got there. If them lawyers had been told you don't get your cut until the people are satisfied, then we might not be at a settlement. Now, how do you fix that? The lawyers in the state and the city and the McLaren, who y'all calling the gatekeepers, have agreed on a proposed partial settlement. Now the ball is in the people's court. The judge is just watching to see if it's fair and adequate. According to the lawyers, the state, McLaren, the plaintiff's lawyers, they've all agreed that it's fair and adequate. The judge will not mess with the settlement if all parties agree, but the biggest party right now, the final aspect before final approval, is the people. So the judge has set up a process to hear from the people, watch and see how many vote to opt in and how many vote to opt out. These are going to be all of the telltale signs whether or not the judge will give final approval if the 80 to 90,000 people say it's fair. And that will be judged on who opt in, how many opt out, and how many voice their concerns. So the solution is in the middle of COVID-19. We've got to effectively communicate with over 80,000 people in order that they can effectively communicate intelligently with the judge. So we know how we got here. We know who agreed. Mr. Pauli talked about people agreeing. It's creative. And then we know how to fix it and make it better. But the challenge is communicating effectively with over 80,000 people in a short 60 to 30-day period of time. I submit that the deck is stacked because you would need tons of people to communicate individually with that many people.
All right.
This is Pastor Dre Hill.
Yes,
this is a prime example of what happens to impoverished communities and communities of color. The people who run the system do things to us and not with us. This governor is going to have a harder time getting reelected if she doesn't get two of her wheels back on the road. She's kind of halfway off the road right now. Maybe she thinks she's got it in the bag. I don't know. But she came here a lot when she was running for governor. She came and sat in rooms with 40 and 50 pastors. She came and had meetings with the public. Why couldn't you do that before you agreed to this settlement? In my opinion, the buck stops at the governor's desk. We need to be talking to the governor right now, in my opinion, making sure that she's not hearing it by third parties that this community is not satisfied, because I believe the state had to agree, because the money is coming from the state. They had to agree to the details of this settlement. So that we need to be talking to her yesterday. And we need to be figuring out which other settlements are coming. So when it gets to us, we won't be in the fourth quarter coming out of the end zone, and it won't be the ninth hour. We are always reacting instead of acting. We've got to get ahead of the curve with these other lawsuits that are going to be settled with the EPA and these other people, and start having those conversations with them now, with the lawyers, with the governor, whoever is involved in making those decisions, so we don't have the same problem 2 or 3 times over with these other lawsuits that will be coming down soon.
Well, praise the Lord, Dr. Miller. And how's our time, Judy?
We're real good on time.
All right.
We only had the 2 questions, so we can move into audience now.
Yes, and I didn't mean to cut Brother Herbert off. I just wanted the panelists to get in on this first, knowing that we were going to give the audience opportunity to chime in. Brother Herbert charge it to my, don't get mad at me now, but we're trying to get something here on solid as an organization, the Neighborhood Without Walls, bridging the relationship between the black and white. That's what it comes down to: black and white and money, economics, and the gatekeepers right now predominantly are Caucasian, Western Europeans. They are the gatekeepers, and somehow Satan has got into their hearts, and racism is the top of their agenda. And they will cut us out to make money, because we would not be in this situation 6 years ago when they were talking about the what's the name of that water, Jeff Wright. You don't hear nothing about Jeff Wright, the drain commissioner. Am I right? Was he the drain commissioner?
Yes.
But anyway, he was the drain commissioner. So 6 years ago, Dr. Miller, this was coming on the scene. We were getting water from Detroit. We were doing good. We had our own water line. We were selling water to the county. When? But the gatekeepers, racism, and control took that right away from us, and that's why we're here today. And I believe there's a brand new water plant out on the southeast corner of Genesee County that Jeff Wright built. Am I right about that?
Yep. Yep, and it's
The
really
county is getting their water. See? And here we are in the middle fighting 6 years. Snyder's gone. He got his feet out there in Miami somewhere in the water. And now we're fighting with this situation. So we've got to come together, black and white, to work this solution out and go forward so that the residents of this city will get their rightful due. Those 2 questions were designed to help us to come to some type of solution that we can come together, galvanize, mobilize as black and white working together, because we all God's children. Amen. But some of us are holding the golden age right now, because he who holds the gold is always in control. So these are the things that we've got to work on. Now we are opening up, Judy, as you say, to the audience, or to the other persons that like to have a question to the panel on those 2 questions, or put a question out in general. Yes.
Okay.
Anybody?
Yeah.
Roberts.
Yes, I'm here, and I've definitely made some notes here, but I definitely want to say Dr. Miller was on point about the governor's office. I also would like to say about solutions. Before we had the internet, black people always had the grapevine. So just like what Eric was talking about, getting that information out to the mass of our community, that's something we need to be concentrating on, getting this information out so we can be more intelligent about how we move forward. And again, that mass effort can take place if we're committed. Back in the day, the NAACP Defense Department, as far as for the legality of what's going on in our community, took a forefront in doing some things that need to be done as far as legally getting this information also out to our community. We need to get the NAACP and other outside National Action Network, Al Sharpton and them. We need some help with this information getting out there, and then also boycotting. We need to really consider boycotting some of the things that's taking place in our community and things that we have allowed to let take place in our community. Back in 1945 or in 1946, it started down in Birmingham, Alabama. And again, we need to be committed about removing our dollars out of a system that is diametrically opposed to our existence.
Well, I agree with you, Brother Roberts, on the boycotting. And as Dr. Miller has said earlier, we have been protesting. We have been going places. Dr. Miller and a few other pastors have gotten together and developed a letter of our situation here in Flint and presented it to the gatekeepers, if I can say, but nothing has been done. Back in the day, the emergency manager, we campaigned, boycotted, went to Lansing, jumped up and down, did all of that. But I'm right with you. I concur with you on that, Brother Rob. We need to make some noise. Anybody else like to chime in on what we can do?
We just gotta find the pressure point.
Yes, sir.
If you touch me or hit me or squeeze me in the right place, I'm a holler. So we've got to figure out what's the pressure point for the state government, for the governor's office. What's the pressure point? How do we get them to want to respond and to have some dialogue, which should have happened beforehand? What's the pressure point to get them to sit down at the table? And I think pretty quickly, I have another meeting when I get off of this call. Pretty quickly, I think there's going to be a contingent that ends up in the governor's office from Flint. Right. So that has to happen. We don't have that much time left, so let me be quiet and let Dr. Pauli talk.
Dr. Pauli?
So I just want to add one thing to that. I mean, insofar as the way forward involves influencing people at the state level in some way, I do think it's important to understand that, I think that there is a fundamental difference of opinion as far as how severe the water crisis was from inside the community and at the state. And that crosses over into this new administration, which may be seen as an administration that's friendlier to residents. But I'm telling you, there are people making decisions at that level who do not think that you have been hurt as badly as you think you have been hurt. And it's as simple as that. And so, it may be the case that, doing further studies like the cancer cluster study Art has been fighting for and so forth, that yields new scientific evidence that you can bring to them to show that there are other harms. But, in the absence of that kind of documentation, I think people just need to understand that, every time you go to the state raising these issues, you are going to be confronted with that mentality, whether it's out in the open or not. I mean, people don't like to come right out and say that. So you kind of got to look for glimpses of it here and there, but you can get glimpses of it here and there. There's just a difference of opinion. So, I mean, to some extent, you could say it's in the state's interest to downplay and minimize what happened in Flint, because again, that means that they're less liable. And I think, you can show pretty easily that that's part of what's going on. But I do think there is at some level just a difference of opinion of how bad, in terms of how bad the crisis was to begin with. And we know how important it was to bring hard evidence and to be able to put it in front of people and say, look, you can't deny this now. And the fact of the matter is, we have a lot of issues that may be linked to the water in one way or another, but without putting that hard evidence in front of people, it's going to be hard to get them to see the situation the way people on the ground see the situation.
Pastor Thrillkill.
Hold up, Woodson. Somebody else want to chime in before the panel? Any other listeners out there?
We do have a couple of questions in the chat, and I'll start with the most recent, which was, how can we opt and hire a lawyer with no proof of any injuries?
Could you say that again?
Yeah,
What's the-
I think the word out is missing. So how can we opt out and hire a lawyer with no proof of injuries?
I think Pastor Threlcare,
Dr. Reed,
I think that's the pressure point that Pastor Miller was referring to in my mind. The pressure point is we do whatever we do, protest, raise issues, talk to the governor. I think the pressure point at this point in the settlement is the opt-out. But you got some people who want to opt in. And I can see people who might get 1.5 million for a Legionnaire's death, even though if they're 80 or 70 years old, that money shrinks to 300,000. Everybody who died should get 1.5 million or more. They even got that category screwed up. But the pressure point is the opt-out. Because if you look at the 3% category with $1,000 cap and you opt out with 20,000 adults, it's gonna offset the people who opt in. And you can't just opt out. This lady raised an excellent question because you got to get lawyers. In order to be effective and do that pressure point, you need lawyers filing motions now because the judge is listening and the judge listening through motion. So if we was to have people who opt in and continue to file motions and raise objections, and then you had a number of people opt out who got lawyers and started to proceed, that's the pressure point. What they're hoping is that people can stay ignorant. The majority of people opt in and they say they happy. So the pressure point has something to do with what this young lady is asking about opting out and lawyers involved. This ain't nothing you just gonna file on your own. You need lawyers with opting in and opting out people in order to exercise this pressure point.
all right,
Sister Kill.
another question?
Pastor
All
Threlkare.
right, go ahead, Woodson.
All right. What I heard when Councilwoman Jerry Winfrey Carter asked the lawyer at City Council, she said, what happens if a number of people opt out? He said that if a number of people opt out, that they have to go back to the drawing board, either renegotiate or they have to go to trial. I can get $500 worth of cans, man. $500 is nothing. If you don't have any proof or anything in this settlement, you get nothing. So why would I want to opt in anyway? And then even if you object, if you go in to object, you are opting in. So you don't even want to object because they putting it to where if you object, you in the settlement.
But Mr. Woodson, you have to be in it to object. And you know for a fact it's going to be, if 80% opt out and 20% object, we still need to be able to communicate through those people that's still in.
But here's the thing that I'm saying, right?
Okay, to the panelists that have spoken, let some of the other of us please at least make a couple comments.
Yes, ma'am. We will move back to Sister Powell, back to the non-panelists, and what questions are in the chit chat, whatever you call it. Another question.
I didn't put a question in the chit chat room, but I would like to say that this mayor is not representing enough residents in the city of Flint. The governor is not in support of enough of us. This conversation tonight is lacking white men. It is so obvious. It's disgusting. And I think we have to broaden. I mean, I'm as a Black woman, as an elder Black woman, I'm sick and tired of begging white people to do the right thing, including the judge. She has a moral responsibility to this community that's been harmed. If I think I've been harmed, I shouldn't have to go in front of her on my knees and beg her to believe me.
All right. All right. Another question. Our panel like to respond to this lady.
I have a question. Dr. Lee Bell, this is leaning more so toward the following lawsuits, but we're being told this is a negotiated settlement. what the heck does the state have to negotiate with? They broke Flint. They need to pay Flint. And I want people to think about this. These lawyers are in it for the money only. They do not have our best interest at heart. Ask yourselves, how did the 300 mostly white girls and women prove they have been molested by Dr. Nasser at Michigan State?
All right. I hear you, Lee.
And the suggestion for, as we mobilize, I suggest that we bring in the AARP group, and I can approach them about joining our effort. They have an excellent state and national presence.
Pressure point. That's a good
Pastor 3LK, real quickly. We started out talking about systematic racism. This is a prime example, because you allow
again the panel is taking up the time for those of us, and that's not fair. We were promised at least 10 minutes.
All right, I hear you, caller, but give Dr. Miller an opportunity to continue his answer there.
We allow the perpetrator of the crime to determine what the penalty is going to be and how much they want to pay. That's a part of the system that needs to change.
Each one of the callers, okay. We back now to the listening audience. This lady that said, you want to respond to that, sister? You don't want to show your face, but I hear your voice.
Well, I'll tell you that I am beautiful. That's one. And I think that we ought to find a way to publicize what conversation we had tonight. It seemed like TV 12 was here. We have no way of knowing what the media will do when they report out on us. And often it's not in our favor. I think that's something that Mr. Mays does a really good job with. I think Mr. Woodson does a real good job with on keeping the grassroots residents informed about what's going on. And Reverend Felcrow, you do a wonderful job on that. I appreciate you doing it too. And we just have to have maybe regular conversations, maybe weekly on this topic until we get. And first of all, the city has a digital divide. We don't even get to talk to everybody in this process.
Amen.
I mean, we're
working on it. We're working on it, and that's what we want to do as a group. That's why we have this Zoom tonight with this panel. We're working on it with compassion, and where you can help us. Yes, the word has got to get out. We need to make more noise. We're, like I say, we're a day late and $1 short. If we would have done this 6 years ago when that Tendaji, that waterworks situation, and we met down to the city hall and we went back and forth, should we buy into a new water plant or new water system? We were doing all right with the water from Detroit. But the gatekeepers interrupt our system. Any other comments from the listening? Not the panel, but from the listening. Anybody else?
There is another question in the chat, and it's asking if we can sue the lawyers, like the state of Michigan is suing the Trump lawyers. I don't know who that is directed at, if anybody knows the answer.
I can answer, Pastor Threlkill.
All right, there, lawyer.
You can file motions on the lawyers now and bring them before the judge, and I would suggest motions that say they are not communicating effectively, motions that say they've negotiated not to give us enough time, motions to say that they ain't explaining registration versus opt-out. They could have just called it an opt-in form. They had a hearing of this sort against the conduct of Mr. Lois Fletcher. And so you can use that as a model. The answer is yes. That's part of what we should be doing as pressure points. We should be filing complaints with the Judicial Tenure Commission, but we more importantly should be filing motions about their service to us, particularly in explanation to this many people with the judge. These type of complaints and motions can help change and structure what's going on now.
Thank you, May. Judy, how much time we got? About 3 minutes? You say 7:30? All right, we got about 3 minutes left, panel. Any conclusion, as everyone take a few seconds to wrap up with a conclusion from the panel?
Reverend Thurkel.
Yes.
Before the call ends, can we galvanize to organize for next steps before we end the night?
That's a good idea. I've kind of tuning in with Dr. Miller and other interesting groups within our community. We do need to come together. Now, if we have that resource to do that at this moment, we'll do that if necessary. Dr. Miller? Any suggestions? Lee Bell was asking, how can we come together with these pressure points?
Well, as you stated, I'm actually a part of a couple of other groups that are working on some strategies to move forward rather quickly, because we're kind of, we're in the fourth quarter. We got to figure this stuff out real quick. So I don't know if we have time to do that on this platform tonight. I think that might take more time than we want to take. But you can share my number with Lee Bell, and I'll share any information that I have as far as what some of the groups are trying to do that I'm involved with.
Yes, we've got to come together, and so we just got to keep working together as you have been suggesting, and we need to just keep talking over the back fence, over the Zoom, any way we can, make some noise. Karen Weaver has a great show every morning at 8 a.m. I believe it is, Dr. Miller.
7 a.m. to 9 p.m.
Hey, man, they make a lot of noise over there in Lebanon, and especially with Sam Riddle. And I'm going to try to get him back over here on one of our programs and make some noise. Amen. We need to make some noise and push those pressure points, those points. Yes.
If I could just interject, I think that what we heard from Dr. Bell, I have heard from others that they don't know what's happening, with the settlement, or how can we organize what's being done. So is there, Dr. Miller, would you be willing to put an email in the chat, or a way that we could open up the ability for concerned people to become more involved?
Be our point, man.
Ask that question again now.
Is there a way, I think what Dr. Bell was expressing, that there are others besides him who are not as involved as they want to be, or willing to take part in some decision-making and some advocacy, but they're just not in the loop. So is there a way to open up what's going on as far as the decision-making and the planning? Can that be opened up to other concerned individuals?
It can. We just started this conversation really this morning on the radio show. Well, maybe yesterday morning. I was on the show yesterday too. Yes. So a few of us decided to get together tonight. So it's not really a group with a name, it's just a few of us that are going to have some initial conversations. And as we did on the piece with GISD, Brother Woodson, we reached out to, we had everybody that we knew that we could reach out to in these different groups, NAACP, Water Warriors. And all of us went out, invited all of them in, and we began to have these conversations and strategize together. That's how we were successful with the GISD piece. So we haven't gotten that far yet. This is the first conversation. Okay. So, but once we start pulling other people in saying, hey, come on, we're strategizing. Tonight, we're just doing some brainstorming. But once I get that, I'm willing to share, because we need the whole community involved.
Yeah.
Amen.
And I would say,
Neighborhood
Pastor,
council.
that I would say that all individuals who have a little piece of understanding, just start hosting Zoom meetings. Individuals, invite us in, host them. We'll pick up on them. We'll come in, listen to the radio show from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. on 9:10 a.m. with Dr. Weaver. Listen to the Pastor Threlkeld show. Let's talk about it. Saturday from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. on 1420 a.m. Host a Zoom meeting and invite us to talk. We got to do this, and we got to do it fast.
Amen. All right. All right. Well, we thank our panelists, each and every one of you, and Dr. Pauli. Amen.
Thank you,
Somebody
thank
said
you,
Thank you.
thank
You
you.
was the only white person here, but that's all right. You held up, man. You held up. Well, we wanted you in there anyway. Amen. But we're glad to do this on behalf of the neighborhood without walls. Amen. We're blessed to be here, and I'm gonna turn it back into Judy. Y'all can close out. God bless you. Let's get them pressure points and let's build a fire and make some noise. All right, Sister Judy.
Thank you.
All right,
Threlkeld.
let's do that.
I want to thank everybody on the panel. You've been very informative. I think we've all learned a lot and given us a lot to think about. And I think there is a good cadre of people here who are anxious to get more involved. So I hope that we hear from you as your brainstorming continues as to where we go from here, that we continue to hear from you so that we can lend our support.
And
Thanks
I
for having us.
do want to let everybody know we will share this recording. So for people who were not able to attend, and I'll get that uploaded as soon as possible so we can share.
Amen.
Can
Thank you.
Can I give my cell phone number? 810-922-4860.
All right. God bless all of you. Good to see you, Hubie Roberts. Amen.
Sir.
Make it go. Amen. All right. God bless you. And thank all of you. Pastor Miller, hang on in there. Woodson, keep on chatting, man. And my jailhouse lawyer, bless your heart, Eric Lee. Till
I just
next
want to
time.
say,
God
Thanks
Yes,
for
sir.
having
I
us.
want to say I'm tweeting all of my legislators right now.
All
All
right.
right.
Let them know
all
I'm
right.
watching them, that we're not
Yay.
happy, and we're gonna move forward, and I will do
That's
my best
Yay.
to get the word
That's
out.
what we got to do. We've got to do, and we've got to cross the aisle to all the white folks. Get on board. Amen.
Yes,
What is terrible.
preach,
Amen.
Reverend Southcrown.
That's all right. Praise. Amen. God bless you. Hey.